The truth on birthday celebrations. Now, if you've been following this channel for quite some time, you kind of already have an idea of where we're about to go with this. However, I still encourage you to stick around because there are going to be some facts that I'm sure you may have never heard before. And if you have never heard of this channel, or if you're new, there's a lot in store for you too. So without further ado, let's get into this. Now, one of the things that the believer and the unbeliever seems to have in common is that our observations, our celebrations are pretty much the same. And that in and of itself should be a red flag because we're told to be set apart, called out. But if you look like you're still with the in crowd, then there could be some form of disconnect in your walk. And when it comes to these birthday celebrations, I'll give you the short version. It's not a biblical custom. And by the time we finish this video, you're going to see that not only is it not a biblical custom, but it's actually more satanic than you have been told. Now, can you find instances of birthday observation or even birthday acknowledgments in the Bible? Of course. Now, when you get to Genesis 40, you read about Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers. And in Genesis 39, verses 1, we read, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there." So Potiphar is the one who actually ends up buying Joseph. And it's Potiphar's wife who makes several attempts at Joseph, tries to get to put that thing on him. He refuses, he runs away, she snatches a piece of his clothing, and in her embarrassment, she cries out rape. Now, immediately, Joseph is thrown into jail by the captain of the guard. This is the captain of Pharaoh's guard, who happens to be Potiphar. So the same man that buys Joseph ends up having to actually throw him into jail swiftly because of this charge. Now, while in jail, there is two men who are also thrown into jail by the same guard, Potiphar. And these two men are the baker and the butler. Not just any baker and butler, but they are the Pharaoh's baker and butler. One is in charge of the wine, one is in charge of the bread. Now, we don't really know what they are in jail for, but given the fact that it's dealing with food and it's dealing with you preparing food for a royal specimen, we can kind of guess that it was a plot of treason, or maybe someone said that they may have even tried to poison the Pharaoh. Either way, Potiphar puts them in jail, but he puts them with Joseph, under Joseph. He assigns them to Joseph, we read. And here's the thing, though Joseph has a high status in prison, he doesn't use it to be served. He uses it to serve others. Take note. Another thing that you want to take note of is that Potiphar may not have really believed all that his wife said, because even in prison, he gives Joseph a high esteem, a high regard, a high position to put people at his feet, something that most people often skip over. Now, continuing, we read that after they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to Yah? Tell me your dreams." Oh, I want to stop there too, because you can go down the street and find diviniers and people who read your palms and people who interpret your dreams. But here, Joseph asks, do not the interpretations belong to Yah? They don't belong to a magician. They do not belong to your grandma. They do not belong to the voodoo priestess. They do not belong to tarot cards. They do not belong to your zodiac sign or any of those things. They are all counterfeit. You either believe the word or you don't. Anyway, he says, "Tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream, and he said to him, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches, and as soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup in his hands." This is what it means, Joseph said to him. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift you up and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what it means, Joseph said. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Sheesh. Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday. Are you with me? And he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in the interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. That there, ladies and gentlemen, is your first biblical account of a birthday feast. And you know what I see here? Well, one is the obvious death. The second is worship of self. You see, because Yah gives and forgives, but men get and forget. And even though the cupbearer kept his life, he didn't keep his promise. Just that quickly, he got caught up in the mix. And we see it all the time. When we are in distress, we are in a big mess. When we're put to the test, we pray to Yah to help give us rest. And as soon as he frees us, well, we don't do our best. This is what the cupbearer does, and a lot of you all are just like him. But back on these birthday celebrations. Now, when you get to the Brit Hadashah, which literally means the New Covenant, most people know it as the New Testament. Now, in Mark chapter 6, we get to verse 17. And there are 2 figures known as Herod and Herodias. Now, Herodias, she was married to Herod's brother, Philip, at one point in time. But Herod and Herodias ends up together, which means Philip must have been around somewhere because this was adultery. And because it was adultery, the prophet John, Yahshua's cousin, openly spoke out about this scandal. And Herodias couldn't stand him. But she couldn't really touch John because John had a lot of respect in the land. And Herod was afraid of what that might cause a trigger. So the most Herod could do was just have him arrested. But Herod respected John a great deal. So in verse 17 you read, for Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. He did this because his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him. Again, ladies and gentlemen, what you're reading is a foul woman who has a grudge against a righteous man because he's calling her out on her BS and holding her accountable. And we know that hell have no fury. Continuing, but she was not able to because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. You'd be surprised how common it is, by the way. You know, when you're talking to people and you're giving them the truth, it's bittersweet. It's entertaining, but it's painful at the same time, and you just can't bring yourself to stop asking questions or stop listening. But you know, the more you listen and the more you hear and the more that's answered, you now have a responsibility. As Solomon says, the more you know, the more you hurt. Continuing in verse 21, finally the opportune time came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and his military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. There's that birthday. And when the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have a unrighteous woman and she has a daughter, 9 times out of 10, that daughter may inherit that trait. This woman sends her daughter to do a dance, a hypnotic, tantalizing belly dance. And Herod is just taken aback from it. The king said to the girl, ask me for anything you want and I'll give it to you. And he promised her with an oath. Whatever you ask, I will give you. Up to half my kingdom. Well, she must have been shaking that thing like Christina Milian. She went out and said to her mother, "What shall I ask for?" You see the plot? This is how we know that there was nothing righteous about this. The mother sent her in there, knowing that this man had been eyeing her daughter probably for a good while. And you know he's good for it because he's marrying his brother's wife. And you know she's good for it because she's with it. This is just an unholy trinity we have right here. The mom says, "Ask for the head of John the Baptist," she answered. At once the girl hurried into the king with the request, "I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a dish." The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in the prison, and brought back his head on a dish. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. On hearing of this, John's disciple came and they took his body and laid it in a tomb. They killed that man for nothing, bro. Hey, but you know what we see in common? Birthday celebration and death. And still, one's ability to think only about self. You see, Herod liked John. If it were left up to Herod, he would not have naturally done that. But because it's birthday, you know, what they tell you, it's your birthday, you deserve this, do it. So any acts of gluttony or any acts of overindulgence, any acts of sexual misconduct, any acts of wanton disregard, violence, get back, you name it, on that one day, at least here in America especially, it's almost like it's accepted. It's your birthday. Act up, act bad. This is more self-worship. Records show that most unwanted pregnancies occur on women's birthday, men's birthdays. And even then you have to ask yourself, who is the pregnancy unwanted by? Because your creator told you to be fruitful and multiply, but you don't want the pregnancy. You just wanted the fun that came with the act. More self-worship, which reaches its height on one's birthday. It may not start out that way, but the way that you have been groomed from the time you had your first birthday that most of us cannot remember, if it were not for our parents showing us pictures and whatnot, you have been groomed to think this way. It's my special day. I get what I want, how I want it, when I want it, where I want it, and you cannot tell me anything. This is the one day I am essentially like a god on earth. Of course, we can't bring ourselves to say that because it's not politically correct, but when you look at the spirit and the emotion and the mentality behind it, that's exactly what it is. On what day would you expect a woman to act most bratty, most self-entitled? Her birthday. And sadly, a lot of men act like that too. When I was in the world, I was in the streets, and I had a older cat tell me, man, he says, "Man, let me take it like this, dog. Birthdays are for children, women, and insecure people." And that's if you're in the world. If you're in the word of Yah, it's not for anybody. And as we continue, you'll find out why. Originally, the idea of birthday greetings and wishes for happiness was and is rooted in magic. The working of spells for good and evil is the chief usage of witchcraft. One is especially susceptible to such spells on his or her birthday. You see, when you were born, if you were a boy, you had a genie. If you were a girl, you had a Juno. These were ancestral, so they say, or familiar spirits that were put on you. From the word jinn, we get the word genie, and from the word genie, we get the word genius. Why? Well, because these spirits knew everything about you. They had been with you since you were born. And on your birthday would be the day that you guys would reunify with all the spells, the incantations, and these ceremonies. Dreams dreamed on the birthday eve should be remembered, for they are predictions of the future brought by the same guardian spirit which hovers over one's bed on the birthday eve. You could read more about this in The Lore of Birthdays, written by Mr. Linton on page 20. Even down to the giving of birthday gifts. That's a custom that's associated with the offering sacrifices that were typically given up to the pagan deities on their birthdays. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, these gods do in fact have birthdays. The traditional birthday cake and candles also have their origins in ancient pagan idol worship. The ancients believed that the fire of candles had magical properties. They offered prayers and made wishes to be carried to the gods on the flames of the candles. Thus, we still have widely practiced birthday customs of making a wish, then blowing out the candles. The Greeks celebrated the birthday of their moon goddess Artemis, which cakes were adorned with lighted candles. In the book called The Persian Wars, written by Herodotus, a Greek historian, this is book 2. In chapter 82, we read, the Egyptians discovered to which of the gods each month and each day is sacred. I told you these so-called deities have birthdays. And they found out from the day of a man's birth what he will meet with in the course of his life and how he will end his days and what sort of man he will be. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you what you're reading. The Egyptians, just like many pagan cultures, just like many Gentile cultures, would associate your birthday with a certain birthday of a deity. And from that birthday, that would let them know if you would be bullheaded like a Taurus, if you would be drawn to the ocean like a marine kingdom sign, Pisces, or whatever have you. It also will let them know what type of personality you have. This is what gave rise to the zodiac. You are now being tied to unclean spirits, fallen angels. It was believed that the positions of the stars at the time of birth influence a child's future. This is how we get into the whole fortune telling thing. What's your sign? Or you're going to do this. I knew that you were going to do this. You didn't know anything. The Chaldeans, the Egyptians, and several other cultures used the horoscopes to predict a child's future. You know, the one thing they didn't use was prayer and supplication and simply inquiring of Yah. Why? Because they worshiped and consulted with demons and fallen angels. This is why you see no mention of Yahshua's birthday in the Bible, ever. December 25th, many people justify their pagan idolatrous worship by saying, we know the Bible doesn't say anything about his birthday, but at least we're picking a day to observe his birthday, and that way we're honoring him. Are you really? And what does the word say about that? In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 26, we read, for every time you eat this bread and drink this cup, you are retelling the message of the Lord's death, that he has died for you. Do this until he comes. You are told to remember his death, not his birth. So even what you're saying is false. It sounds good, but biblically has no weight. Not only that, but I love the fact that Yahshua was born. But the miracle and the blessing and the magnitude of what he did not happen until he died. Not when he was born. You see, it's great that he was born, but he still had to be tested and tried to be true. And until that moment happened, we were not through. And that did not happen at his birth. We were still under a curse at his birth. It was at his death that things got lifted and we were gifted. Still not convinced? Let's go. We read here again from the book The Lore of Birthdays, New York, 1952, by Ralph and Adeline Linton. On page 8, 18 through 20 had this to say. The Greeks believed that everyone had a protective spirit or daemon, which is another word for a demon, who attended his birth and watched over him. This spirit had a mystic relation with the god on whose birthday the individual was born. The Romans also subscribed to this idea. The notion was carried down in human belief and is reflected in the guardian angel, the fairy godmother, and the patron saint. The custom of lighted candles on a birthday started with the Greeks. Honey cakes round as the moon, remember the moon god Artemis, and lit with tapers, which is candles, were placed on the temple altars of Artemis. Birthday candles in folk belief are endowed with special magic for granting wishes. Lighted tapers and sacrificial fires have had a special mystic significance ever since man first set up altars to these gods. The birthday candles are thus an honor and tribute to the birthday child and bring good fortune. Listen, man, you have no such thing as a guardian angel. Now, you may have a guardian fallen angel, but again, birthdays push this narrative that everything is all about you. Why? What's so special about you that heaven would set above a specific guardian angel to watch you in all your foolishness? That's what happens. oh yeah, I was out doing what I shouldn't have been doing and my guardian angel saved me. Why not just live a life that you don't need a guardian angel to begin with? Why not just lead a life that's pleasing to the Father to begin with? Now, the conical hats that you see the children wear, that is the same hats that the wizards and the warlocks wore, in the shape of a pyramid. This is to help channel that energy up to the deity under the stars that you were born under. In the same way, it is said that these pyramids are built directly under stars in Giza. And in part 2 of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, I've already covered the ubiquitous balloons, especially the red balloons that are so often associated with birthday celebrations, as well as clowns. Again, all ritual. In Ecclesiastes chapter 7 verse 1, Solomon says that the day of death is better than the day of one's birth. And why is that? Well, kind of the reason why we're told to remember the death of Yahshua. Simply because your birth alone is not as significant as the way you lived your life. And that's what many of you all still do not understand. Forget how you entered the world. How will you be leaving? Who will you be when you leave? Where will you be spiritually when you leave? If you don't take anything from this video at this point, please take that. After all, this was written by the wisest man in scripture. Even now, when people practice the biblical custom of circumcising the male child, they do so on the day of its birth, which is typically the first day. But according to Genesis chapter 17 verse 12, that's supposed to be done on the 8th day, never done on the birthday. It's insignificant to what Yah wants us to do. Now, obviously, we know that people in the Bible were able to count the years that they had been on earth. We're not saying that they didn't know how old they were. But you do not need a birthday celebration with all the rituals that we just named to know how old you are. It's your birthday, okay, the day you were born, another whoop-de-doo. Anything outside of you giving praise and thanks to the Most High, it's kind of moot, I'll be honest with you. Again, Adam lived to be 930 years. Somebody was counting the years he was here. We have a whole book in the Bible called Numbers. All we talk about is how many people are around and what age they are. So I'm not saying that. What we're specifically talking about is the hedonistic, pagan, idolatrous worship of self and deity on these birthday celebrations and where they come from. And again, if you search the scripture, you'll notice that many people are mentioned being born. We see that. But the precise date, whether it was with a lunar or solar calendar, however you want to go about it, that's never given. If y'all wanted birthdays to be celebrated, then perhaps he would have given specific dates in the Bible, but he did not. In older times, various Hebrews would mark their age based upon the Feast of Trumpets, which was in the fall, or the Passover season, which was in the spring, or New Year. Again, Solomon says a good name is better than good oil, and the day of death is better than the day of birth. Again, who are you? Your birthday will never indicate that, but by the time you die, everything that you did or you didn't do definitely will. Not only that, when people were distressed in the Bible, you know what day they cursed? They cursed the day that they were born. Job cursed the day he was born, as a reaction to all the suffering to which he was subjected to. Jeremiah, yes, the prophet Jeremiah also cursed the day of his birth as a means of conveying the message of his bitterness and having to foretell the destruction of the holy temple, and even worse, his knowing that the prophecy was destined to be fulfilled. People didn't really even praise on their birthday. They would curse the day if met with a lot of calamity. That was our mind frame back then. And this is the faith that was originally given to the saints as recorded in Job. So then what are you doing? I don't care what you call yourself, Christian, Jew, Hebrew. If it's biblical, I ask you, what are you doing? Does your system of worship and your faith align, as the word says, with the original faith that was given to the saints? Often I run into Christians who believe that, well, wait a minute, didn't the Magi, the wise men, come from the east and they gave, little baby Jesus presents on the day of his birth? Few issues with this. First, the wise men definitely were not with Yahshua on the day of his birth. The Bible is clear that he had already been born. We read, now after Yahshua was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born, King of the Yahudim? For we have seen his star in the east, and we have come to worship him. This is Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 2. Furthermore, notice they came to worship him, not to celebrate his birthday. You know, it was customary in those times, and really still is today, to provide gifts when meeting royalty. And make no mistake, Yahshua is and was royalty. Thus, the wise men meeting him provided presents. And that should not be construed with a birthday celebration. And then also, there are a variety of speculation about who these wise men in fact were. But one that makes the most sense is that they were really among the part of Israel. The Apostle James wrote to the tribes which are scattered abroad. That's in James 1:1. So we know that even in the times of Yahshua, some of the tribes were still scattered, according to the Bible. The first century Jewish historian Josephus stated that some of the tribes of Israel were in fact beyond the Euphrates. This is Josephus' War of the Jews, chapter 2. Beyond the Euphrates means east of Jerusalem. East of Jerusalem would place you in Persia, where they came from. Another reason to believe that these wise men were actually Israelites or of an Israelite origin, and definitely had been taught by Daniel, who was an Israelite, is that they had access to at least part of the Hebrew Bible and likely responded because of verses such as this following. A star shall come out of Jacob, a scepter shall rise out of Israel. That's in Numbers chapter 24, verse 17. And since the wise men had been of Israelite origin, they, like the Jews, may not have had traditions of celebrating birthdays. And for all the New Testament only Christians, keep in mind, the Bible is clear about specific times of a certain holy day, such as Passover. That's in Matthew chapter 26, 17 through 20. We have Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, verse 1, and the like. But it never mentions the date nor even the precise month of Yahshua's birth or any birthday. You can go to Matthew chapter 1 and Luke chapter 1 or Luke chapter 2 verses 1 through 20. And again, so far in the Bible, we've only seen sinners celebrate their birthdays. Pharaoh, who was a god on earth. Herod, who was an adulterer. We haven't seen any of the holy people in scripture, no one, celebrating their birthday or holding or having a banquet on their birthday. And I also would have you know that, again, like I told you before, these deities have birthdays. Zeus, December 25th. Osiris, December 25th. When Pharaoh became king, the word Pharaoh literally means God King. He became the deity in the flesh. When do you think his birthday was? If he is now taking on the image and likeness of Ra, and Ra or Osiris is known to be born or reincarnated on December 25th, when is Pharaoh's birthday? This is why the kings started having birthdays, because the kings of earth from way back old started to be in legion with these fallen deities. And when Satan and his legionnaires fell from heaven, they became a new creation. Their birth can no longer be traced back to the original time that Yahweh had created them. They took on a new birthday, symbolizing their fall and their rebellion. Man's affinity to want to associate and be like these fallen deities also took up these birthdays as well. Last thing I'm going to hit you with, and I've saved this for last, because if at this point you are still unconvinced, by the time I tell you this, there will be nothing that you can dismiss. This man you see on your screen is known as Anton LaVey. He started the Church of Satan in San Francisco, California. He is an open Satanist. And in his book, The Satanic Bible, on page 96, on the 1976 version, it mentions birthdays, and here's what he says about it. The highest of all holidays in the satanic religion is the date of one's own birth. This is in direct contradiction to the holy of holy days of other religions which deify a particular God who has been created in an anthropomorphic form of their own image, thereby showing that the ego is not really buried. You see, the Satanists feel, why not really be honest? If you are going to create a God in your image, why not create that God as yourself? Every man is a God, they say, if he chooses to recognize himself as one. So, the Satanists celebrate his own birthday as the most important holiday of the year. And after one's own birthday, the other two major satanic holidays are what we know as Christmas and Halloween, or All Hallows Eve. Again, very interesting that it's considered for birthdays to be the most important holiday to these Satan worshippers. Again, even down to that happy birthday song. Happy or happy is the Apis bull, the god of the Nile. Play on words is that the Nile is a river in Egypt, but the Nile should not be in you. Come out of Babylon. Which you can learn more about in part 2 of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. But again, I just ask the listener, the viewer, if after you have heard all of these things, if after you have been given the facts, the information to get information, if after all of this, you're still not convinced, I just don't know what else to tell you. If you do not see it improper for any level of believer to partake in these pagan, idolatrous beast feasts, that only seem to upset the Father because he's warned us repeated time again to abstain from them. If you don't see the reason in not keeping them, I don't know what else to tell you. You can keep at it like Anton LaVey, but you know he's dead now, and I want to leave you with the last message he was known to give on his deathbed.
You know, it's a little bit off subject, but the same kind of principle. I heard that, and I won't mention his name, but it was a big leader and founder of a huge satanic organization. And he was on his deathbed, and for a Satanist at the time of death, it's a great victory for them, because death is a huge thing that they celebrate. And he was getting ready to die and pass on his powers and that. And on his deathbed, he must have got some revelation or an angelic appearance or something. And he went into shock, and he said, "Oh my, oh my, what have I done?" He said, "There's something very wrong. There's something very wrong. There's something very wrong."
Wow.
And his whole life had been spent propagating these satanic beliefs, getting everyone to believe, establishing official organizations for Satanism. And then at the end of his life, he gets this light that comes to him, and everything that he built, he realized was wrong.